Hi, I'm Effie and I predominantly make bookish content, but sometimes I make FlossTube content. It just depends what I'm in the mood for. Today's video is going to be a very late wrap up of me talking about all of the books that I read in March and April. And whilst I talk about these books, I'm just going to kind of play some B-roll of me kind of crafting, doing my hobbies, chilling out. So if you want to watch and craft along with me, feel free. But also, if you want to treat this video like a podcast and just have it on in the background, that's perfectly fine. So before I get into the video proper, I'm just going to ramble a bit about life and mental health. If that's not something you're here for, that's absolutely fine. There will be a timestamp on screen that just skip ahead to this if you want to hear me talk about books, I guess. So the reason it's been a minute is, quite honestly, my mental health has decided it's gonna decay. Like I've been doing okay, or at least I've been telling myself I've been doing okay, but realistically some days it feels like I am hanging off the edge of a cliff and like holding on by my fingertips, and like there was weeks of time where I couldn't really even like get out of bed. Like I was spending 24 hours a day in bed, which is obviously not what you hope for yourself. But I also know that, you know, mental health is not a continuum, and you are going to have days where you aren't doing so well, and you have to work on like trying to not feel so bad about yourself. But it ain't easy, especially when society is not built for for people that struggle. And I know, like, I'm 100%, like, I'm not alone. Like, I don't think I know anyone who isn't struggling, and that is completely valid. I feel like it's been a couple of years where I've kind of come to terms, or had to try to come to terms with the way that my body and my mind are not allowing me the same joys in life that I used to. It's been really hard for me to realise that, you know, as a teenager, which obviously, like, I'm getting older now, my teenagers were not just yesterday, but like as a teenager, I would travel all the time, I would go to concerts all the time, and now the idea of being in a crowd, the idea of like being near strangers is just not something that I can handle most of the time. Like, it takes a lot for me to be able to leave the house. Like, I wish it weren't the case. I wish my brain didn't freak out at the mere thought of leaving the house, at the mere thought of possibly encountering someone that I don't know. But that is the case. So I don't really know what my point is. Like, I would like to be able to be consistent with my YouTube, because it is something that brings me, as corny as it is, I feel like it brings me some meaning and some peace to my life. But it's finding that balance of what content can I make when my brain is being, if you excuse my language, an absolute dick. Like, it's hard. And I think it's also hard as well because I feel like, and this is probably just me putting caveats on myself, and, you know, if you're here interacting with my content, you probably aren't too bothered about like what books I'm talking about. Maybe, I don't know. But I feel like if I can't read like certain books or can't get certain videos together, then somehow I failed and I can't make content. And I'd love to be able to have like more structure, or to be one of those creators that's like, oh yes, you can look forward to this video coming out on this date. But unfortunately, my brain just doesn't want to play ball. And I think that's also been reflected in my reading in March and April and like coming forward into May. But I feel like mentally I'm in a much better place. Like, I'm making content again, which is something that I think I just need to try and like find a way to make content even on the bad days. But anyway, like, I'm making content again, which is always a good sign. But yeah, I just found that like my brain just wanted books that were candy, and it was in a very specific thing of like, you want to read this kind of very, very particular kind of book. And it wasn't what I'd planned to read, and it meant that my content... Oh, sorry, that's me hitting my wardrobe. I don't know if you heard that. But all my content plans just went out the window. Anyway, I feel like I've been rambling for ages, but if you want to kind of interact in the comments and kind of talk about what content you like to see from me, if you like to see content from me, or if you just want to chat, like, I'm here. I don't know what the point of this ramble was, but I just wanted to sort of apologise because I feel really guilty when I don't have consistent content, especially when I promise things. Like my Darren Shan content, I am a little bit behind on my reading for my Darren Shan content, but it's more that because I haven't been in a place to film, I haven't been able to produce the content. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I'm what I'm getting at here, but I hate feeling like I'm letting you down, especially because I really appreciate anyone who kind of supports my channel, comes back, and, you know, keeps watching. And yeah, as I say, like, as corny as it sounds, it is something that helps me find meaning in my life. But yeah, I think let's just get into the video now without all this rambling. Let's get into talking about the books that I read in March and April. Okay, so unless I have miscounted, in March and April, I read 32 books, of which 5 of them were rereads. So I shan't be talking about the rereads today. But I will say that for the most part, there was one reread that didn't really hold up to my recollection, but the rest of my rereads were like really enjoyable. I enjoyed them pretty much as the first time I read them, which is what you want from a reread, you know? So I'll work through the books that weren't rereads in, I think it's actually the order that I finished them in, but I'm not 100% sure, and maybe the order will feel somewhat random, but we'll work through it. I will say there's a lot of actually really good books that I finished. I don't generally rate my books, or at least if I rate them, it's not something I talk about because I want my reviews to be more qualitative than quantitative, in that I hope that the words that I'm speaking convey what I think about the book. And also, I mean, I don't know. I don't know where I'm going there. Sorry. Tangent again. Okay, so first up we have Secrets of the Vampire by Julie Laguerre and Elsa White. I think this is a book that maybe has caught my eye in the past, but I'd not picked up. I'm not sure. I will say that it was generally pretty reasonable. Like, it was talking about the origins of vampire mythos, and it took the perspective of it being written by a vampire, which felt unique and kind of quirky. I will say, though, it didn't go quite as deep as I would have liked and wasn't as expansive as I was hoping for. But then I think part of that is that I didn't realise it's actually aimed at a younger reader, which is fantastic. Like, we should nourish the interests of younger readers. And I do think that considering it's a target reader, it actually had more depth than I necessarily would have expected. It wasn't looking at vampires in the very oh yes, Bram Stoker, Sharon Le Fanu. Oh my gosh, why can I not remember the name of Carmilla's author? It wasn't just looking at that one perspective. I'm pretty sure it looked at the origins of vampire mythos in ancient Egypt and in Japanese folklore, in South American folklore. It was looking at a more global picture, which I really appreciated, especially because I know that vampire mythos has a lot more depth than we necessarily see in popular vampire books. So I was really happy about that, and I guess it could work really well as a foundation to research further into different origins of vampire myth. And ultimately, as someone who loves a vampire book, I was living my best life reading it, to be quite honest. The next book that I finished was another vampire book, but this one was a fiction, and it actually appeared on, I can't remember what newspaper it was. I want to say it was maybe the Evening Standard or something. I know it was a British newspaper, and it just appeared on my newsfeed on my phone. And it was this article that was 10 romantasy reads. And I opened it up because I'm always very suspicious of lists like that. Are they just going to be the Sarah J. Maas, the Jennifer L. Armentrout, or are they going to be more expansive? And this list did have the usual candidates, but it also had Feybound by Sarah Al Arifi, which I will talk about in a little bit because I did read that in this period that I'm discussing. But it also had this book, which I'd literally never heard of, and it's called Law and Lust, and it's by Carla Nicole. Now, this is a vampire story that's set in present day, but does a really good job of showing the anachronisms of vampire society, because when you first start reading it, you think it's set maybe in the 1800s, because these are ancient beings who feel somewhat stuck in the past. But something I liked so much about it, it felt unique, and also I realised, I think when I did my first episode of Vampire Recent Reads, and hopefully I will have an episode 2 coming out soon, I just haven't read the next Black Dagger Brotherhood book, which is kind of my stopping point for each episode. Basically, every time I read a Black Dagger Brotherhood book, I'll do a episode of Vampire Recent Reads and talk about the other vampire books I've read. I completely lost my train of thought. But basically, this book takes what felt like a fresh and unique look at vampires, and the fact that our two main characters are not white, and you know, it was something that I realised I need more diversity in my vampire reads, and it's something I prefer more diverse books, but like I'm not looking for every book to contain diversity. Like, obviously it's amazing if a book contains diversity, but I look for diversity in the breadth of books I'm reading, and I feel like Carla Nicole delivered with this book, because we have one vampire who is from Japan, and I think he's a realm leader in Japan, which is like the vampire world's like split up into different areas, and there's, you know, local leaders and stuff. So he's a Japanese realm leader, but he's currently living in England. And then we've got this other vampire that living in England, but he's Italian. Basically, I'm doing a really bad job of describing it, but it's such a good romance. It's such a good book, and apparently I just don't have words to describe it. But I will say that is a unique. Is this the third time I'm saying it? It's a unique approach to vampirism. I think it does a really interesting job of baking in the lore together, and the romance is so delicious, so incredible. And the fact that this series is, well, I think the series is 3.5 books long, but then I think there's like a spin-off series that continues with characters that you've sort of vaguely touched on. So basically I'm living my best life because there's so many books for me to enjoy, and I'm sure I'll get into talking about it a bit better when I do my next episode of Vampire Recent Reads. But, you know, just pick it up. I highly recommend it. The next book that I picked up was The Awakening of Ivy Levold by Sierra Simone. For those of you that have watched my content before, you'll know that I am a massive fan of Sierra Simone. I think she writes really good romances, and the fact that queerness is baked into all of her stories, but also the fact that a lot of her characters are Catholic but don't feel an opposition between their queerness and their faith is something that I really appreciate. Because I read this, probably about 2 months ago now, I don't remember if religion really played a part in this book. I don't think so. It's more about a young woman ends up having to move in with her cousin's widower, and then like sparks fly, and there's this kind of mystery of how did her cousin really die. So it was absolutely delicious, and also it's so short, but it doesn't feel incorrectly paced. Like, it feels exactly right for the length of book that it is. And I really want to continue reading more of this series, but I think it's one of the ones that is still not traditionally published, or at least doesn't have a UK publisher, because it's a little bit trickier to get your hands on copies of the book. But the audiobook, which is how I read this, is absolutely fantastic and highly recommend. I think it's only about 4.5 hours long, but well worth the time. I mean, if you haven't picked up a Sierra Simone romance yet, I will say her romances do tend to be quite spicy. So if you're not someone that enjoys that, which that is perfectly valid, obviously, but if you're not someone that enjoys spice, then Sierra Simone probably isn't the author for you. But if you don't mind a bit of spice, then I do recommend her as a romance author, because I think she writes incredibly. And in fact, the next book that I want to talk about is another romance, and it's another author that I really recommend as an author of romance. So the next book that I read was Waiting for the Flood by Alexis Hall. And this book is basically 2 vignettes about these 2 men that were in a relationship for I think a decade, but then they ended up breaking up, and we're seeing their romances as they find someone new in their life, like someone that they both deserve and suits them. This book came as a surprise to me because I know that Alexis Hall has talked in the past about how he will write spice into his books where it feels appropriate, but if it feels more appropriate for it to be closed door, then that's, you know, what he'll write. Like, he's not the kind of writer that, you know, like, if you're picking up a Sierra Simone book, for example, you know it's going to be spicy. I couldn't tell you on a chili pepper scale how spicy to expect, because honestly, spice is so subjective and personal. But, like, if you pick up a Sierra Simone, you know just how spicy it's going to be. But if you pick up an Alexis Hall, like, it just, I think, I don't know how to describe it, but, like, previous to picking up this book, I had only read boyfriend material and husband material. I think those were the only 2 Alexis Halls I'd read. I feel like 10 Things That Never Happened. So I feel like you can kind of picture them in their own kind of grouping. And as far as I remember, they're very much like Fade to Black, or if there is any sex scenes in them, it's very minimal description. It's a lot more about kind of the feelings and the conversations and the vibes, which I absolutely love. And I'm not saying that Waiting for the Flood doesn't have that, because it does. It gets you in the feels, it has the conversations, but it also has a lot of kind of high heat. And it was my first time reading Alexis Hall smut, and he writes beautifully. Also, like, chapter long sex scenes, very impressive. I was a bit surprised because I didn't know this was kind of a book of 2 halves. So to get to the end of our first character's kind of story and then to switch to a different perspective, and it's this guy that has been painted, to call him a villain is probably slightly inaccurate, but he's been painted in somewhat of a negative light in our first character's perspective. So you're going, well, why do I want to follow him? I don't really care about his story. But the skill of Hall's writing is that very quickly you begin to understand this character and you begin to root for him and go, okay, I actually want him to be happy. I'm enjoying following his story. This is really interesting to read. And I overall had a really good time. Although I will say it's made me massively crave pierogi. And my local supermarket's rubbish. And it can be a bit difficult to find vegetarian pierogi. So I think I'm going to have to make some at some point, which, oh, the hardship of making homemade pierogi. But the next book that I read, I'm not going to talk too much on because honestly, well, it wasn't really a book per se. It was a short story, but it made kind of no impression on me. It does make me intrigued to go into the story that it's actually a prequel for. And that is Whispers from the Cocoon by Quentin Lee. I think it was just one of those that my brain wasn't in it. So, like, I don't know if you ever get like this, but I was reading it, but I wasn't processing it. Like, do you ever do that where, like, you're like reading it, you're sub-vocalizing, etc., etc., but your mind's wandering and you go, oh, I actually like, I've managed to read that, but also I have no idea what's been said. Or is that just me? I don't know. But I think it ends on a kind of dun dun dun, and that makes me really want to pick up Chrysalis and Requiem. I just haven't yet. The next book I read was Dark Stranger, The Dream by I.T. Lucas. I picked this up basically because it sounded like a rip-off of Black Dagger Brotherhood. And I guess, like, if you are desperate for more kind of Black Dagger Brotherhood vibes, then this series is great. And I think there's, like... I could be being hyperbolic, but I don't know. I don't remember. But I think there's, like, 100 books or something. But that could be completely off base. There's a lot of books in this series. But it felt really, really like a Black Dagger Brotherhood ripoff. Like, there was a lot of commonalities I saw between Dark Lover and Dark Stranger, which I get, like, it's going for a similar vibe. But in the ways that Dark Lover really succeeded, Dark Stranger just missed the mark. Oh, sorry, knocked my tripod. Just missed the mark completely. And I think it was also a bit of... So in recent years, I feel like I've gotten to know what I like in the romance genre. But... romance can be a difficult genre for me, and I think it was one of these where it's like it felt contrived and I just didn't enjoy it. It's the kind of romance that years ago I'd be like, oh yeah, romance isn't my genre, but it is. It just has to be the right kind of romance, and I can't quite put my finger on it. I think it's the fact that these characters weren't communicating properly, but also it felt like any obstacles were just for the sake of the book being a bit longer, if that makes sense. I also think that the way the book was split, so I think obviously it's a much larger series with a lot of characters, a lot of individual stories, but I think the initial arc with these two characters takes place over a trilogy. And I think the way that it's been split is really awkward because you're kind of waiting for this particular moment to happen all through the book, and then it just doesn't happen. And it's a lot of like, you almost get to that point and then you don't, and then you just get whiplash, and it overall wasn't enjoyable. But I know from the little sort of teaser introduction that was at the end of the book for the next book, we do get that in the next book, and I'm like, I hate it when books do this, where like they technically include the moment you've been waiting for, but only as a taster of what's next to come. Ugh, infuriating. I wouldn't recommend, but at the same time, like, say, if you are looking for more of like the vibe of Black Dagger Brotherhood, you know, first see if there are more Black Dagger Brotherhood books, but if not, this might scratch the itch, but also it might just make you annoyed like me. The next book is A Fate Inked in Blood by Danielle Jensen, and I'm not going to talk too much about this, largely because I've got, I think it's like an hour long, a video that I made with B, who is my spouse, where we went into like quite an in-depth discussion about this book. I will say I had a really good time with it. Like, there was a couple of things where I was like, okay, I saw that coming, but it didn't reduce the enjoyment for me in any substantial way. So what I'll do is I will, if I remember, which I'm horribly forgetful, but if I remember, I will link it in the description, and you can go check that out if you want more information or more fuller thoughts on what I thought about A Fate Inked. Okay, so I don't know where it cut me off, but like my microphone had a bit of a technical hiccup. So I'm having to record this in a slightly different way, so hopefully the audio is still good enough. I apologise if there is a dip in quality. I'm trying my best, but sometimes technology just gets in your way. Like, isn't it typical? I'm finally like recording, and then my technology is like, no, microphone says no. As I was saying, How to Solve Your Own Murder by Kristen Perrin is, and this might be terribly British, but it's if the Inheritance Games and Midsummer Murders had a baby, this is the book that you would have. So it has a kind of like cozy, let's figure out who did this murder vibe to it. There is a bit of a romance to it that felt almost forced, but I get that it's setting up for something that we see more in the series going forward. And overall, I thought it was enjoyable. It wasn't particularly predictable, but I didn't love the past timeline, like the present timeline, where our character's trying to get to the bottom of everything and figure out who committed the murder was interesting, and the past one I found actually kind of confusing. It took me a minute to get the chronology straight in my brain, and it wasn't the vibe that I was hoping for, unfortunately. But overall, it was actually a really solid book, and if you're someone that enjoys mysteries, as particularly like a cozy mystery, this is definitely a good recommendation. The next book was simply amazing, and that was Feybound by Sarah El Arifi. I hadn't picked up a book from her before, and this was such a good book to start with. I actually reserved it from the library. Gosh, I don't even know when I reserved it, because I have a plugin on Chrome that when I'm on sites like Amazon or Storygraph or Goodreads, it'll tell me if my local library has copies. But what I didn't realise until at some point last year is it actually tells you if they've like basically ordered one and it's on their system, so you can reserve books before they even come out. So I did that. And I'm so glad I did, because I really loved this book. Like, I want to own a copy, but I'm glad that I got a chance to like read it from the library and know that I absolutely adored it. So in this book, you are following elves who are locked in something called a forever war, and this woman makes the decision to listen to her sister's prediction on the day that she was promoted. Her sister is a seer, and like is being trained up to be like the next head of the seers. So her sister comes along and is like, oh, you'll find greatness in this direction, and she makes the ill-advised decision to listen to her sister, and it ends up being so bad that she gets exiled. And then it's like her story is only just beginning, because she discovers some incredible stuff. I had a really good time with it, and also we love a queer normative book, and that's what this was. I also just, I don't know, there was just something so beautiful about the story, and also it kept me so engrossed. I had to keep reading and know what was going to happen. And then just like a small thing, but at the end there's this thing that's I think it's like Lottie's notebook or whatever. So it's like notes on each of the characters. So it's basically like a character list, but like gives you a bit more background and stuff. And it has pronouns for each of the characters. And it's such a small thing, but I absolutely adored it. Oh, it made my heart happy, this book. And I'm so glad it was exactly as good as I expected, because I was like, oh, maybe I'm just hyping it up in my head. Maybe it won't be as good as I think it will be. Nah, it was better. It was so good. I absolutely adored it. And I'm so looking forward to when book 2 comes out, which I believe is the start of next year, but eagerly anticipating it. The next book that I read was Bride by Ali Hazelwood, and I've seen a lot of people like not vibing with it, but for me it was an absolute vibe. Okay, so I think the thing that a lot of people aren't vibing with is the knotting. And I get it, 100% I get it. I think before I'd read Bride, I'd encountered knotting, I think, once, because Squeak and Squeal by Vera Valentine are Omegaverse books, so I was familiar with the concept of the Omegaverse. And funny enough, I actually feel like Bride was less Omegaverse than I expected. I mean, I don't think I've read enough books that contain knotting to really comment on like those particular scenes that I get people are not enjoying. Sorry, that was a really unintentional pun, I promise. But it didn't bother me because I expected it. Like, when this book is being promoted as Omegaverse, I was expecting so many things, and then really all we got was the knotting that was like, oh yeah, this is Omegaverse. But then maybe I just had incorrect assumptions about Omegaverse, but I don't know. I do think some of the writing was a bit pretentious in places, but I also think that's just Ali Hazelwood trying to keep her STEMinist vibe going, which, clearly there's a market for that because people love Ali Hazelwood's books, and that's brilliant. I mean, I don't think they're something that genuinely appeals to me. Like, Bride, I did enjoy really. Like, I did enjoy, but I don't think I would be interested in reading her contemporary romances. What I will say though is I feel like we could have done more with the vampires and the werewolves. Like, I would have liked to have seen a bit more of those fantastical elements. And I think from my very biased perspective, as someone who adores vampires, it felt a bit disappointing that it was more of a werewolf story, but I get it because it's a Omegaverse, and a Omegaverse is more wolfy shifter kind of thing. But I was really pleasantly surprised. Like, I was concerned because the things I'd heard about Hazelwood's writing, I was like, is it going to be for me? I don't know. But yeah, it was an absolute vibe. And once I got past the slightly pretentious bits, I was like, yeah, I like this. I'm having a really good time with this book. The next book that I read was quite a different kind of book to the other books that I've talked about, and that was Diavola by Jennifer Thorne. This is a horror story, and it takes place, in Italy, I think. This family goes on holiday, and then there's this creeping sense of dread. Things are slightly off, and weird things are happening. But I think it did a really good job. Well, it did a really good job of creating that tension and making for quite a scary book where you feel the chills moving down your spine. but I also really liked the way that it was looking at the expectations that family might place on you and the way that you might feel like you owe your family something. It went in some weird and wonderful directions, but I absolutely adored it. And I think the weird and wonderful directions that it went in means that it won't necessarily be something that will be for everyone. But for me, it was perfect. I absolutely adored it. It was so creepy, so atmospheric, and you didn't know what was going to happen. You didn't know how these characters were going to resolve the situations that they were in. Oh, I really really enjoyed it, and I want to go back and read. I don't know if Jennifer Thorne's got one, two more books, but I want to go back and read more from Thorne because so good. To Ignite a Pyrite Spirit by Callie Pay is the first book in the Bound by Flame series, which everything going to plan, my brain is chaos, but everything going to plan, I will have a video up at some point in the near future where I talk about all 9 books in the Bound by Flame series, but this was the first one, and so the idea behind this series is they're all dragon shifter romances, and each book's written by a different indie author, and they've kind of come together. So in the months of April and May, every Friday, one of these novellas is being released. I don't know. So I think it was vaguely interesting. Something didn't quite sit right with me with this book as I was reading it, and then when I got to the end, I was like, "Oh, you're talking about colonization, but you're not really sort of talking about it as a bad thing. You're talking about it as a good thing." And at the end of the day, like, we are adults, we are able to comprehend that colonization is never a good thing, and like, no. And there are books that are villain romances. Like, I love a corruption arc. I love when we've got like a true villain that we're following. But it felt off. And then I think what kind of annoyed me I'm impatient, I need all the things now, is that there was a sort of epilogue at the end that implied we were going to have a more like a poly situation, and I was under the clearly misguided impression that these books were all standalones. So the epilogue very much felt like it was setting up for another book, and it also felt like, oh, we're finally getting something intriguing. I would like to see that instead of what I've just wasted my time reading. And then like I looked and I couldn't see any information on like what that next book was or how I could see more of the story. So I don't know. I think realistically I'm probably going to reread it before I do my Bound by Flame video, because clearly my thoughts have all gone out of my head at this point, and I want to be able to talk about it in a way that actually, gives some useful information, because me going, oh, I didn't like it, something about colonization, is probably not the most useful review. So let's just move on to The Last Devil to Die by Richard Osman. I had heard this book made people cry, so I went in with that expectation and was like, oh, is it really going to be? Yeah, it had me weeping. But I think some of that comes from personal circumstance. Like, if you can see echoes of your life in a story, it is going to hit all the harder. Like, it is beautiful, it is impactful, it manages to have a conversation that can be quite complex and divisive in a way that is compassionate and appreciates that there are going to be people that have different perspectives on this, and then isn't necessarily going to be a right or wrong answer. And I really, I loved it so much. Also, something that I felt like had been hinted from book one, but felt very much like subtext, actually got made into what's the opposite of subtext? Like supertext? Overtext? I don't know. Like it was made. It was like. What am I trying to say? It was confirmed in this book, and I loved that. It made me so happy. It just, my heart soared at that. And it's like, yes, I've been waiting for this for, I don't know, like 3 or 4 years since I read the first book, and I was like, I get a vibe. And my vibe was correct, and I was like, yes, because I was concerned, especially as the book was getting towards the end, that it was going to stay as just a vibe. And I mean, if you've read this book, I think you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But I don't want, like, if someone's not picked up on the vibe, I don't want to spoil it for them. But it's so good. There's just so many good things about this series. I really like this series. I haven't told you anything about it. But like, it's book 4 in a series. Basically, it's a group of 70 and 80-year-olds, I believe they are, who live in a retirement village, and they solve crime together, and it's so cute. And this one just, I don't know. I adored it and highly recommend it. And I think Richard Osman has such a good way of writing, and I really enjoy that at the end of the audiobooks there's an interview with him, and it's always nice to get a bit of content from the authors at the end of the interview, and you can be like, oh, more content. Get to hear a bit of behind the scenes tea. So the next book, I feel terrible for hating, but it really didn't work for me. And that is, I'm covering my face right now. I'm like, oh no, it's The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I'm like, oh no, I don't like one of BookTube, BookTok, Bookstagram's darlings. But it didn't work for me. So I think I've talked about this before, but I'm not sure. One of the issues I have with Greek mythology adaptations, I mean, there's always going to be exceptions to the rule. There's always going to be adaptations that do it really well. But I find that one thing they really fall down with is that they are trying to stick to the source material, which I get. You want to stick to the source material, you want to be true to the origins, but what ends up happening is you end up having scenes that feel uncomfortable or out of place, or you just wish weren't there because they're staying true to the source material. And that was, there was several scenes in this that made me really uncomfortable. Like, there's one particular scene where, and I was reading this at the same time as my best friend, Shannon, whose channel is Head in the Books. And, like, basically, like, we had very different takes from this book. Like, I think she agreed with me in terms of, like, the romance wasn't as overt as was expected. Maybe, honestly, like, this was back in March. Do I remember anything from yesterday? let alone March. But, like, the romance wasn't as overt as I'd expected. But, and this is something where, like, the characterization, I got a different vibe than she did. But there's this one particular character who's, like, a princess. And I think she's, I mean, I want to say she's a similar age to Patroclus and Achilles, but I don't actually remember. But her characterization in the book, and I think it's just she's meant to be kind of spoiled, but it came across very childish, and for the scenes that she was involved in, it made it incredibly uncomfortable that she was depicted in such a childlike way. And I did not like that at all, and I didn't think it added to the story in any way, which makes me think, oh, okay, maybe this was just like the source material and Miller felt like she had to include it. Did not like it. I also, like, I didn't get the romance vibes. Like, I think maybe because these two men, well, they were boys at the start, but like these two men never really had peace. Like, I needed, this is meant to be a sweeping epic. They're together for so many years. It's like this long love story. But, like, I needed longer for them to sit in their love. But I just didn't feel it. I didn't feel their romance. And then, obviously, like, you knew the end was coming or whatever. I will say, like, the bit that made me cry was, like, right at the end. Like, because you know how the story of Achilles and Patroclus ends, but it's the bit right at the end. Oh, I don't know. I wanted to love this so much, and I'd put it off for years because I was like, oh, like, it'd be great. It wasn't great. It was, in fact, not a good time. And the only reason I finished it was because I managed to get a copy of the audiobook from the library, because I would not have been finishing this book if I had to read it with my eyes. I had to force myself to continue picking it up. It didn't work for me, and I am so sad about that fact. And then the final book that I read in March was I'm Not an Omega by November Sweets. And as you might be able to gather from the title, this is an Omegaverse story. And not only is it Omegaverse, but it contains male pregnancy. So that was a new one for me. I was familiar with the fact that Omegaverse stories can contain male pregnancy, but I think this was only my fourth Omegaverse book that I'd read, but it was my first time coming across that. But I think November Sweets is quite good at what she does. I'd previously only read Blow Part 1 and Part 2, and like I loved Part 1, but Part 2 was a disappointment. But I think it was like the 3-month gap and the way Part 2 picked up. But I think she does write romance quite well, and it was a fun vibe. Like, it's not too serious. It's like CEO. Is it CEO? It's like boss assistant romance, and like the boss is an alpha and the assistant's a hidden omega, and then like the omega ends up going in heat, and chaos. But it was good fun. It was cute. We had like a lovable child. If you're looking for an Omegaverse story, like obviously this is gonna have knotting because it's that kind of story. But if you're looking for Omegaverse and you want something else to explore, like this is probably not a bad Omegaverse story to explore. And then we're on to April, and the first book that I read in April was Galatea by Madeline Miller. This is by far my favourite Madeline Miller that I've read. I think possibly because it's so short, but also it packed such a punch and was written so well. I can't even I don't feel like I can talk about this in a way that doesn't give away the story, but just to say it is another one that is based on mythology, but it has a lot of things that I feel like resonate in present day, and it's just a good time. I don't know what else to say really. Then we've got That's Not My Name by Megan Lally. This is a YA mystery thriller, and you've got this girl that went missing, and her boyfriend, who everyone in the town thinks is responsible for her disappearance, trying to find her and find out what happened. And then you have these scenes of a girl that's found wandering in the woods, and she has no memory of what's happened, but this guy comes to the police station and is like, oh, I can't find my daughter. You found her. And you're sort of seeing this girl that's been captured. Not captured. Well, her supposed father is telling her XYZ, but it doesn't quite line up, and she's like, that doesn't feel like who I am. I might not have many memories, but that doesn't feel right. I did guess the twist, but it didn't take away any of the punch for me, if that makes sense. And I thought it was actually really well written, and I will say as well, it's the kind of book that isn't afraid to go there, and that's something that I really appreciate, because I think a lot of times books will pull their punches and you're like, oh, but imagine the impact if you hadn't pulled your punch. It was a good time. The next book I read was Search Freak, the manga, volume 2, omnibus edition by Takahiro Arai and Darren Shan. I shan't go into too much about this because at some point I should be doing a dedicated review video of it, but just to say, I love the Darren Shan books, and I'm having a really good time exploring them in a different format by reading the manga. The next book I read was The Temporary Wife by Catherine Mora. This is, I think, book 2, and I want to say it's the Windsor series. And this is is it fake dating? No, it's fake marriage of inconvenience, where a boss basically obviously both parties are consenting and fully agree. A boss and his assistant end up getting married in order to get him out of an arranged marriage, and her, I think it's money. I think she needs money for her family. So basically he says, if you marry me, you'll have access to my fortune and stuff, and you'll be set for life, and I won't have to marry this woman that I don't want to marry. And obviously, the way it goes, they end up catching real feelings and stuff. It was overall quite good. I didn't like the way that the grandmother responded to them, but it was so good. I really enjoyed it. And there was lots of bits that I couldn't necessarily see coming. I'm definitely going to be reading the rest of the Windsor series. I'm kind of I'm a sucker for a fake dating, arranged marriage of convenience type story. Like, it's my jam. And I thought this was written pretty well. And, it felt like they communicated relatively well. The bits where they weren't communicating well, it made sense from a story perspective. So overall, it was a vibe. The next book is another one that I feel like I'm hiding my face, because it was The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams Bianco. And I had never read this book because I don't know if we really have like sad children's books, or if we had sad children's books when I was like a child. But I feel like a lot of like the emotional damage as a child kind of books are American ones, and I just like never read them. But I was in like a chat on Discord, and it been mentioned that there was an audiobook on Audible, like included in the subscription for The Velveteen Rabbit, and I was like, ooh, I've never read that. I'm intrigued. I shall pick it up because it's only like 20 minutes long. And I was like, oh, it didn't make me sad. And I don't get it. I feel like the most cold hearted person in the world, but I just don't get why people find it so sad, because it just had no emotional impact on me. But then maybe I am just broken on the inside. Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. There is the story of a trans boy who has been infected with this world-ending virus by the religious cult that he's part of, who basically decided that they needed to make the world end and released horrendous viruses on the world. So this is a book that I can see not hitting for people for a multitude of reasons. Like, there's a lot of body horror to it. There's transphobia. There's religious trauma. A pandemic. Well, is there anything beyond a pandemic? Because, like, so many people have been wiped out. Like, you're looking at, like, virtually no one left in society kind of thing. But it did a really good job of balancing the darkness with the light. Like, you've got this wonderful community of queer teens that are working together to try to make it to the other side of things. Although what's on the other side, like, you don't know. It's this kind of hopelessness of, even if they survive, what will it all be for, kind of thing. But maybe I'm just like overthinking. I really enjoyed it. I think that the way that our main character feels about his body is something that readers may struggle to engage with, because a lot of the book is talking about like transness through the lens of body horror, and our character doesn't experience like much dysphoria when it comes to his own body, which is nice to see, because I think a lot of trans stories will show being trans in one particular way, when like a trans person who doesn't experience dysphoria is no less valid in their identity than a trans person that, immediately wants their body to match who they are. I think as well, like the religious trauma of it is something that a lot of people might find quite complex as well, because, you know, trauma can and does leave an impression on you. And I think the way that our character still has faith, but also is trying to unpack the dangerous messaging that they received from the cult, is something that people may struggle with as well. So I can see a lot of ways that this book won't work for people, and I can see a lot of ways that perhaps it could have gone further in what it was trying to do. But for me, I loved it. I thought the messaging made sense. I really enjoyed the depiction of, you know, the way people were coming to terms with their faith. I liked that we got to see different queer people experiencing their queerness in different ways. I just I just had a really good time, and I'm very excited to read The Spirit Bears Its Teeth and Compound Fracture, and hopefully I'll be reading them very soon. The next book that I finished was Unholy with Eyes Like Wolves by Morgan Dante. This is well, first of all, it's a sapphic vampire story, but it's like Carmilla meets Elizabeth Bathory, and also like Elizabeth Bathory's like handmaiden. It is absolutely savage. It has a very much like women's wrongs to it, and I loved it. There's I'm not gonna get like too into the weeds about what happens in this book, but one of the things I really liked was one of the characters mentions that she was, oh gosh, I can't remember if she was assaulted or almost assaulted, but the response of another one of the characters was like, okay, immediate castration. And I just, I don't know, it made my heart sing. I think that what Dante did really well with this book was the eroticism with the vampirism. Like, you know, vampire mythology, or at least as we're currently seeing vampire mythology, I'm sure like if you look at different folklores and cultures, vampire mythos may be different, but what I currently see vampire mythology, like there is a lot of undertones of eroticism. So you're seeing like it's a lust not just for blood but for the physicality of it. Also, I love books where like faith plays a part but isn't like trying to like ram it or evangelize, and this did a brilliant job. Also, I can't remember the name of the saint that is mentioned in this book, but I thought it was very clever, the fact that one of the characters wears a medallion for this particular saint, and the sort of legend of that saint was that she was assaulted and then beheaded, and she ended up like walking back to town with her head in her hand and like having her revenge. It was a really good time. I highly recommend it. If you're looking for sapphic vampires, this is a really good shout. When I Arrived at the Castle by E.M. Carroll is a graphic novel that, I mean, see, I do like Carroll's art style, but I think that their graphic novels can be a little bit difficult to follow the story of. I also think they make very specific stylistic choices to end the story at the apex. So, like, I know this is deliberate because I've read I read somewhere that basically they're saying that, like, it's kind of the height of the scariness of the story. But what I think is really interesting is that what I took away from this graphic novel was very different than what I've read online. I don't think that my interpretation is necessarily wrong. Like, of course I don't think my interpretation's wrong, because who's going to say that? Like, it's very possible that my interpretation is wrong, but at the same time, I think it's one of those that's deliberately a little bit ambiguous. Um, but it's very, very dark. However you want to slice it, this graphic novel is incredibly dark, but also it is so beautiful. It's the artwork is absolutely stunning. And like I'd love to hear people's thoughts on this graphic novel, because like I did have to look up and go, what's this mean? What's this mean? And then I was like, oh, interesting, interesting. So we're getting down to the last few books. So the next book that I finished was In the Lives of Puppets by TJ Klune. Okay, so I don't think this book is inherently bad, but it just didn't fit my taste. Like, I realised more and more that cozy is not generally for me. Like, I'm not someone who is going to get much enjoyment from a story that's cozy, and this was very much a cozy story. Also, I didn't like the romance. Like, I couldn't get behind it. Sorry. But I think what I'm realising is that I might have had a really good time with Under the Whispering Door, but TJ Klune just might not be the author for me. I think I've got one ebook of his on my Kindle, and I want to say it's like Into the River We Drown or something like that. And I think that'll be the last time I give Klune a try. Like, unless I absolutely adore it. But I haven't heard great things about Green Creek. I have no interest in reading Cerulean Sea. So yeah, I think I'm realizing that like Whispering Door was a good time, but I'm just not really a big Clune fan. As I say, I don't think this is inherently a bad book. And where he really excelled was the character work, because Nurse Ratched and Rambo were absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed their characterization, but the plotting and the pacing just didn't work for me in this story. Last three books. So we've got The Actor and His Secret by Ben Alderson and Laura R. Samerton. This is it's queer. Gotta love a queer story. It's a romance between an actor. Oh, pardon me. Sorry, it's a romance between an actor and a guy that works at the book company of the film. Wow, I'm explaining this really badly. So basically, this like fantasy film is being made that's adapted from a book. So one of the characters works at the publishing house, or yeah, I think it's a publishing house that published the book, and the other character is an actor in the film, and they end up like falling for each other. They meet at the movie premiere, but they like don't know each other, so they end up having like a night of passion and kind of fall head over heels for each other. And it's like, it's cute, but also like there's blackmail involved, and like, you know, awful parents and stuff. But I had such a good time with it. It makes me so excited to read more from both of these authors, and it was such a joy to pick up this book, really. And then we've got The Fake Mate by Lana Ferguson. I thought it was okay. I feel like there was something I didn't like about it. I don't know. I don't know. Because I think I'd heard that it wasn't amazing, but it was fine. Like, it was an Omegaverse story. But rather than it being a hidden Omega, it was a hidden Alpha. And essentially what happens is when it's found out that this guy's an Alpha, he pretends, or he like makes a deal with his coworker that they'll pretend to be mates because a mated Alpha isn't a threat, a danger. So he'll be able to kind of keep doing his job if like he pretends he's got a mate, but then obviously like fake dating, fake mates, they end up falling for each other. I think like I'm pretty sure it's fine, but like the sex scenes were a bit rough. Honestly don't remember. Like this is what I'm saying, my brain is just an absolute like cottage cheese sieve. Ugh, annoying. And then the final book we've got is In Faust by T.D. Cloud. I really, really had a good time with this. So this is possibly a bit niche, and possibly a really bad example, but this book gave me the vibe of, you know, in Vampire Diaries, the TV show, when there's that season where Bonnie and Damon are trapped in the prison world. Yeah, this book gave me that vibes. Like, not the two characters dynamic, because, like, the two characters in this book are enemies, and, like, they are unambiguously never not enemies. Even when they are banging each other's brains out, they are enemies. And I have such respect for that. So, like, they hate each other, but also, like, they want each other. It's so enjoyable. Like, I like how like not nice these characters are. Well, one of them's a chaos god, and the other one's a witch without a familiar, which is like a a thing of shame and scorn in this world. But like the chaos god's just like, yeah, I'm up to devious things. What you gonna do about it? And the witch is like, oh, I'm gonna try and kill you. And then the chaos god's like, yeah, no at all. And I just had such a good time with it. And I loved the way it ended, where it's like, yeah, these people are gonna like hate each other so much. And but also like, sorry. Apparently I'm just not very good at words today, because I'm not good with words when I enjoy a book, and I'm not good with words when I don't enjoy a book. But this is kind of what I was saying when I was talking about To Ignite a Pyrite Spirit. I think that was the one where I was talking about how like we can have bad characters and I can enjoy them. Like at the end of the day, like books for adults, like we're under we're able to have complex thoughts where we can have villainous characters that we enjoy reading about without feeling like we are saying that we condone that villainy. Like the chaos god in Faust is incredibly charismatic, but he's also unambiguously a bad guy. But there's just something so compelling about him, and that's what I really enjoyed. So hopefully I've made some sense in this video. If you do want to ask me any questions about any of the books, feel free to like ask in the comments, and I'll try and be a bit more making sense. I don't know, apparently my words have escaped me, but we'll see what we can do. But I had a really good time recording this. I hope you enjoyed watching. I hope the audio was fine with my technical issues. But until next time, love you. Bye.